It's Tuesday afternoon at 4 p.m. in Switzerland. It's Space Café Web Talk time. Our Space Café Web Talk, 33 minutes with Laura Forczyk, will begin soon. Thank you all for joining us for our talk today about my ticket to space. I think the rest we just can leave. But no, it's the status of commercial human spaceflight. As always, we appreciate your participation and ongoing feedback that is very valuable for us and will help us to improve. I'm Torsten Kriening, your host today and publisher of SpaceWatch.Global, and we are a Switzerland-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. I know many of you are already familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcast. And yes, you are right. Our podcast was about to be published this morning. But it will be there tomorrow on all major platforms and you don't want to miss it. It's a podcast about the origin of life with the wonderful Bruce Damer. It is very intense, but it's worth. And don't worry. I tried to listen it 2 times already. It is hard. It is hard. It challenges you, but take the challenge and let us know how it goes for you. If you would like to know more about us and our goals, listen to one of these podcasts already. And I also want to say here a very warm welcome to Jessica West, who had her Space Café Canada last Friday. And if you haven't been live or a chance to be there live, watch the replay. It is really absolute worth. Her guest was the wonderful David Kendall. So we also keep our fan shop open for you online to support us, where you can support us directly and become an Space Watcher. Edition 1 has cool items for you, your friends, and the ones you love. And your support is needed to keep our work alive. And we do that, of course, for you. If you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our website in the event section and on YouTube. We host our Space Café web talks live weekly. And now, my guest today is a wonderful human with an outstanding view on space, also a great space influencer, an educator. So welcome, Laura Forczyk, on my show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and it helps if you unmute, and we will not hear the fish, so don't worry. So let me say a few words about you to the ones that does not know you already. Laura is the owner of the space consulting firm Astralytical, specializing in space science, industry, and policy, and offering space career coaching services. She is a NASA subject matter expert for planetary science missions. She serves on the advisory board for the Lifeboat Foundation and the Society of Women in Space Exploration. She serves also as a mentor for the Rogue Owns Fellowship Program, and she is the author of Rise of the Space Age Millennials. And we will talk about that a bit later. Prior to forming her own career, she ran the Florida office of an international startup working to establish parabolic and suborbital flights at the Kennedy Space Centers and globally. She also has worked as a scientific analyst for a non-profit, facilitating over 50 experiments on the ISS for the benefit of life on Earth. She earned a Bachelor of Science in Astrophysics from Florida Institute of Technology, and she earned a Master of Science in Astrophysics from the University of Alabama in Huntsville. She conducted doctoral studies in planetary science at the University of Central Florida. And with that, we leave it. Laura, thanks again for having you here. Let's kick that off. As I read in the tweets, you had the chance to talk to so many astronauts for your book, which I just mentioned. Who was the coolest astronaut you had the chance to interview?
Okay, to clarify, the book that you mentioned was published last year, and I interviewed really cool people. None of them astronauts. Those were millennials, people my age and younger. getting their perspectives on the space industry. The book I'm currently writing, which might come out hopefully at the end of the year, crossing fingers. That one, I interviewed 12 flown astronauts, and I'm sorry, 17 flown astronauts and 12 future flyers. I'm about to interview a final future flyer. And the coolest, oh my gosh, there were so many cool. What's really great about some astronauts is that they're really personable. They can really tell some great stories that you can relate to. I mean, they're normal people, right? We elevate astronauts to some high up position. And in fact, they used to be these fantastic, high up achieving test pilots that were willing to risk their lives to do these daring events on vehicles that were never tested. And some of them still are, most of them probably still are. But we're also getting to the day and age where astronaut is changing. The meaning of astronaut is now becoming more encompassing of a wider variety of people, some of them normal-ish, like you and me, right? And so we don't necessarily want to think of astronaut as somebody untouchable. We want to think of them as our friends, our colleagues, maybe ourselves someday.
But I think there's still a difference when you're talking from a country which has 600-ish plus minus astronauts, or you're talking from a country which has 2 or 1 or no astronaut. So I think that is also a relation. But we will have you back later later this year when your book is published. Promise to that, because I would like to know more about it. But our topic today is the status of the commercial human space flights in 2021. What we have. Let's start with an easy question. Where are we on that topic of the commercial human space flights?
We are both not at all far enough, and yet getting to be closer than I would have thought at the beginning of the year, simply because we have some flights that have popped up since the start of this year that will hopefully fly within, within this year, maybe within a year from now. It's a really exciting time because we're in a transition. There was a wave of the initial space tourists, private space flights, participants, however you want to phrase them. I call them private astronauts. And you all can disagree with my terminology, but that's what I'm going to call them. So there was a wave of that back in the 2000s with space adventures flying 7 private astronauts with the Russians to the International Space Station. They flew 8 missions. And that was the very first wave of space tourism. And then that sort of disintegrated as Russia did not need that funding anymore, in a sense. They were too busy carrying NASA astronauts up after the space shuttles retired. And so now we have this second wave, which is much more commercial in the sense that it's a private company's vehicle, a private company's spacecraft, and private companies arranging it to go to the International Space Station, to go free flying around Earth orbit, to go around the moon in the future, and hopefully also suborbital spaceflight as well. So there are 2 main companies. There's more than 2, but there are 2 main companies that are competing right now to be the first in suborbital spaceflight tourism, and that is Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin. And for many years now, Virgin has said that they are on the cusp of flying people, and we just keep waiting. And unfortunately, they had an investor call yesterday that did not bring confidence to our timetable. That we're still going to be waiting quite some time for them to be ready enough to fly another test flight, let alone paying customers. Blue Origin surprised us recently with an announcement that they are going to fly their first crewed flight with a highest bidder on board. And so they're going to fly, they want to fly in July. I don't know if that's going to hold, but they want to fly in July, on July 20th, the anniversary of the moon landings. And that's really exciting right there. And they want to have somebody, a wealthy individual, yes, who bids high enough to fly with 5 additional crew members that I assume Blue Origin will pick, or already are secretly training. We don't really know yet. So that's exciting that Blue might actually fly paying customer this year. They've had successful run of uncrewed flights, so I don't see any reason why they wouldn't fly a crew this year. Then we have SpaceX.
But again, that is suborbital. Okay.
Yes, I was about to get to orbital because SpaceX has been doing fantastic things in orbital private spaceflight. They have now launched 2 three, well, I guess it depends on how you look at it, NASA missions with crew to the International Space Station. And they, in the future, September-ish, I think is the current timeline. So it's September 15th or something like that is the no earlier than date, will fly their first completely private mission with no previous astronaut experience on board. So that's the Inspiration 4 mission. And that has been bought and paid for by an individual, Jared Isaacman, who then chose one of his crew members and then held a contest and a raffle, in a sense, to have the two other additional crew members. So that's 4 people on a SpaceX Crew Dragon that'll orbit Earth. Oh, I forget how many days. I should know this, but I think it's something like 3 or 4 days. Forgive me, I've forgotten how many days they're going to orbit. But they're not going to go to the International Space Station. They're just going to orbit around in a Crew Dragon that has been modified with a big window on it. So that'll be pretty awesome. And I know that mission is currently training right now. We see some great updates from them on how they're preparing. SpaceX is also doing great things with working towards taking missions to the International Space Station with a company called Axiom Space, which has already picked its first crew of 4. One of them is a former NASA astronaut, Michael Lopez Alegria, and the other 3 are private individuals who have paid enough money to go up on space station for about a week, I think 8 days, something like that. And they are in negotiations with NASA and presumably Russia, although we don't know those details. They're going to pay, they already have a contract with NASA to pay to use the ISS facilities up there. And so that's really exciting. That should launch in January or no earlier than January of next year. And Axiom also has several other missions in the works and their own space station as well. So from suborbital to orbital, and now cislunar is the next one. Cislunar means going around the moon, in the vicinity of the moon. And SpaceX has already been planning a mission called the Dear Moon Project several years ago. It was 2 years ago now. A wealthy individual in Japan purchased an entire flight, not on SpaceX's Falcon 9, but on their big rocket Starship, which is currently in the prototypes. Had a big success last week, timelines. So it's really exciting to see that vehicle being developed, because that is a very heavy lift vehicle that has a large capacity. So Dear Moon, last I checked, they're not entirely certain how many crew members are going to be on board, but it's something like 11, 13, where 8 of them are believed to be private individuals that will be chosen, and they're going to be artists or creators, however that's defined. And so there's an open competition for that as well, where people around the world could compete to get chosen to be a creative person on this mission to go around the moon. And I love that concept, because we need to bring the humanity, right? We need to just not have this like sort of robotic way that we go to space. We need to bring the humanity of space back down to Earth and get people excited about, what it means to be up there. And it's one of the reasons why we also go with humans instead of just sending robots, right? Because we are humans and we have those emotions and we have those perspectives. And so I love that idea. And then in the future, SpaceX could in fact bring private individuals to the moon, because they have recently won a contract through NASA for their Artemis program, their human landing system. SpaceX is going to modify their Starship to land on the surface of the moon with NASA astronauts, and presumably in the future, NASA partners as well, to land on the surface of the moon. And that contract structure is such that it's not just a NASA vehicle and a NASA mission. NASA is doing it in this way, contracting it out, buying a service, so that SpaceX can develop the capability so that they, in the future, could actually bring private individuals to the surface of the moon. So it's decades out still, but it's very exciting. And of course, SpaceX was founded with the intention of bringing people to Mars. And so that is their ultimate goal. And they're not the only players, right? There are others that we could talk about, but that's good for now.
That was quite a big overview and a lot of material to digest. Let's break it into some smaller items. I mean, last week we had the pleasure in our Space Café Germany to talk an almost retired, so next month I think retired, ESA astronaut Thomas Reiter. I mean, he was active on the Mir station and on ISS. So, I mean, just from the talk we had with him, it was interesting to understand what the big differences is. But in your opinion, what is the big difference between an agency, government astronaut, and a commercial astronaut? Can they do the same, or are these just tourist or rich individuals which just spend a hell of a lot of money for just being up there? What is the value of them?
Yeah. If you've ever looked at an astronaut call that the government has put out, it is very particular. You have to have a master's degree in the United States. You have to have certain, education, certain criteria. You have to start certain physical conditions. You're competing against thousands of people for a very, very limited slot. And so it's extremely competitive. NASA and other space agencies want to pick the best of the best. And so when you have that kind of competition, you really do get out the best of the best. And there have been some fantastic astronauts that really blow your mind to this day. And so when you think more broadly to those who can purchase flights or purchase flights for other people, because it's not just individuals flying, there's other organizations that are also wanting to fly, like Space for Humanity comes to mind. Space Hero is a reality TV show that's trying to get underway. Now, other ones have failed, but we'll see if they succeed. So when you think about opening it up to the broader population, why should space be just for the elite of the elite? And remember, it's not just the elite of the elite, because historically, a lot of people were left out. So historically, a lot of people who could have been considered the best people to fly were not allowed to. The Mercury 13 comes to mind, where, yes, they weren't officially as the astronauts in training. That's the 13 women who trained doing the similar, and in fact, I think it was the same types of ways to prepare and the tests that the pilots and women weren't allowed to be test pilots. And so there were a lot of people left out, people of color and people from certain, geopolitical countries, which is where you see right now China developing an independent capability to launch because they've been left out of, say, the International Space Station. So they're building their own. So there's a lot left out when you're just talking about government space programs. Mm-hmm. If you're talking about private individuals, you can argue, yes, there's a lot left out because it's still the wealthy who can afford them. However, the idea is, and we're not anywhere close to this, but the idea is that you start out with it being the people who can afford to purchase it, the very wealthy. And then as it becomes more and more, I don't know if routine's the right word, but more and more accessible, the price comes down. And so that in the future, it'll be like buying a ticket on an airplane, where the majority of the population of the planet can buy a ticket on an airplane. Not everybody, unfortunately. So there's still socioeconomic concerns there. But that's the way we want to go, is that where the majority of the planet can go to space. And remember, we are all space flyers in a sense, because planet Earth is flying in space. And so there's no reason, or in fact, it's even a right for people to be able to access space. So we want to get to that point. We want to get to the fact that anybody can go fly. And this is also thinking about people who don't fit that perfect mold of who it means to be a person, right? So people with disabilities, for example, ESA put out a call recently for a specific type of disability, short in stature or limb disability. And I love that we're opening it up. Commercial companies can do this in a way too, in a way faster maybe than governments can. So Inspiration 4 is flying the first person with who has had bone cancer. And so she actually has a prosthetic and walks with a limp still. And so private individuals, private companies can, as long as they fit certain criteria, that they're not at a risk of, litigation against the company, probably not, because at least here in the States, it's all experimental still. Wide numbers of people can be able to fly, and that's the goal.
Got it. Let's take a small step instead of the big giant leap. Now, you mentioned suborbital space flight, so as the first hurdle to space. So what are the values beside nice experiments in weightlessness, or for me as an individual to experience that, and the overview effect? I think that is widely taken, but do they really have any relevance for our future, or is it just an intermediate step? How do you see that?
Can you still hear me okay? Okay, you cut out for a second. But yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because it's not just people who want to go up there for the ride, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody I've spoken to has some deeper meaning as to why they want to go. And I've interviewed now 12 people who are actually ticket holders to fly up in space. And for some of them, in fact, they are scientists who want to go work in space. So I'm thinking particularly of the suborbital science community that actually has been preparing for years now to fly, themselves up in space. There already are opportunities to fly science on a suborbital vehicle, but scientists themselves, we want to be able to control it. We want to be able to see the environment that we're working in. And so one of the analogies that comes up quite often in that community is that, field geologists get to work in the field, oceanographers get to work in the ocean, volcanists get to work in volcanoes, around them. And so why not space scientists of various kinds work in space? And so you can do really fantastic research if you're human that is much more cost efficient and much quicker than if you're automating it. It's actually more expensive in some ways to automate science than it is to just send up a person. We did send a geologist to the moon. That's Jack Schmidt, Harrison Smith. So he still goes to conferences and talks about the great lunar science that he did. And that was just one mission. Imagine if we sent scientists on a regular basis to iterate their experiments to learn more on the field, whether that field is in microgravity or whether that field is on a planetary surface. And by planetary surface, I'm including the moon because I'm a planetary scientist. I do that. And so you can really see how the differences is if you send scientists. Now, anybody can really be a scientist. And in fact, we know that some of the people who have flown with space adventures, in fact, I think all of them, and as well as the people who plan to go to space, they all want to take up some kind of science experiment with them, either something that they've created themselves or something that they are contracted out to do by another organization, whether that's a university or a government agency or whoever it may be. There's also outreach. You can do some really great science and education outreach options that'll get a lot of attention just based on who the people are who are flying and what communities they can reach. And I think that's one of the most important things, is to be able to see yourself in somebody who has gone up or is going up. So for example, there are certain categories of people who've been left out, right? Whether you're talking gender or race or geographic area. You talked about how some countries have only flown 1 or 2 astronauts. Well, if you start getting more and more of those types of people that others can relate to, that might inspire them to think, if that person's gone up, I can do that too, right? And so I'm not just talking about children, I'm talking about anybody, inspiring them to really get involved, because space is part of so much of our society and we don't even realize it. And especially, I think, some of the other countries that don't have space programs, they don't realize it. And so the more that they start to realize that they can get involved in space, the more that we can really progress humanity forward.
But let me come back. I mean, we talk about in that section about suborbital space flights. I mean, I've taken all the points you mentioned, outreach, or all these geologists on the moon, all of that taken, understood. But the question for me is the suborbital space industry flights. Can you give us some examples of experiments that are relevant, that has to be discovered now, and we can do that now, what we couldn't do on a drop tower or on other things? Or zero G flights?
Sure, yeah, this is a common question. And I'll give you some examples of the time frame so you might get it. So drop towers are very, very quick. That's when you have a tower in a building, a tall building, and you drop something. And that's just, a matter of, half a second or I think, close to a second is the tallest one, I think. Maybe I'm wrong there. But when you're talking about parabolic flights, the Zero G Corporation is an example. There's some other ones around the Vomit Comet, but you're going up and down and up and down. When you're diving, then you get about 25 seconds of free fall. And so each parabola is 25 seconds. So you have to kind of break up your experiment. And I've done 2 of those campaigns, so I can tell you how difficult that is to get reoriented each time. And so 25 seconds, you can do a lot more than half a second, but that's still not a lot of time. So then your choices are either go completely to space, which is limited. It's really limited. When you're talking about SpaceX, launching satellites, well, that's not so limited. But if you're talking about launching humans, they're only launching, 2, maybe 3 human missions a year, maybe 4. They'll get up there, but it's still not that many. We're only talking about, a certain finite, tiny number per year. And if you're talking about the Russians, they can maybe do some. If you're talking about Chinese, so you spread it out. There's only a handful of human missions to space a year. If you're talking about suborbital, that has the opportunity. It hasn't proven itself yet, but it has the opportunity to be much quicker, a much higher cadence. It could be every day, in theory. Don't quote me that that's going to happen, but that's the theory, is that it actually could be turnaround of hours. So you fly in the morning, you fix your experiment, you fly in the afternoon, right? So that's not how it's going to be initially, but that in theory is how it could be. So the amount of time in suborbital spaceflight, it's only a matter of like 5 minutes of microgravity time. It also depends on your experiment. If your experiment needs microgravity, that's not a lot of time, but it's still more than a parabolic flight. If your experiment just needs the atmosphere, there are certain areas of Earth's atmosphere that have been so ignored because we can't access it very well. So the upper atmosphere actually has a lot of potential for science there. Or it could be something mounted outside of the spacecraft, so the whole mission matters. So it really depends on the experiment, what you need. Myself, I come from a planetary science background where we did experiments in suborbital, not with humans, but automated suborbital. And I've also been on the parabolic flights, and my advisor's also done some stuff with sending a little experiment to the space station. To the space shuttle. And so that was just a dust dynamics. We were trying to understand how dust works in microgravity or low gravity environments, and how things move. Everything is so different in microgravity. It's really a totally different arena. And if you've ever gone on a parabolic flight, you know what I'm talking about, because it's not like anything you can experience here on Earth. It's so different. Everything works differently. All the fluid dynamics and all the ways that you perceive things, with your eyes and with your brain and the inner ear, everything is so different. And so there's a lot that we can learn in microgravity, believe it or not, that we haven't learned with all the space stations that have been up for decades now. And we have so much more to do.
No, that was a reason that I asked, because I wasn't aware of it. And I mean, for me, I wouldn't go on a parabolic flight, to be honest. So I'm fine with the turbulences we experience on a transatlantic flight. That's bumpy enough for me. So, and I'm happy to survive that. So let's move on to the more adventurous things here. You talked about the first commercial orbital flights that are planned for later this year, or as early as you said. So may you give us an overview about Axiom's AX-1 compared versus Inspiration 4, both using the same capsule, one with a bigger window, as you mentioned. But what is the difference? What is the goal of both?
It is so fascinating to look at these early missions because they show us the possibilities. And so Axiom's first mission was announced first. And I'd mentioned already there is a former NASA astronaut already on board. So the interesting thing is that it is really a demonstration of who you stereotypically think would be on these missions, which is wealthy white men. Right? Not all Americans, though. So there's a mixture in terms of nationality, but it is people who can afford these flights. And if you look at the population of the world that is extremely wealthy, it is vast majority men and vast majority white men. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, except you don't capture the whole diversity of the human population there. You don't have the whole pool of who could be on these flights, right? And so again, I mentioned when you see someone who looks like you get inspired to follow in their footsteps, or you think that you can. And so it actually is to the benefit of companies, in my opinion, to show that there's so many different types of people who can fly. But that is such an interesting mission because it shows that there are going to be really diverse groups of people in terms of geopolitical considerations. It's not just going to be people who live in certain countries that have traditionally space programs. It's going to be people who maybe had never had the opportunity to be, okay, got interrupted by some child. One of my kids is at the door. But in any case, so that's what's interesting about that, is it's going to be a different countries, different representatives of different countries. That's my son. So he'll be fine. And so when you think about then kind of contrasting that with the Inspiration 4 mission, which was specifically chosen to be quote unquote inspirational, and I've tried it inspirational, because first off, it was to benefit a charity, St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. So the second crew member who was selected is a representative of St. Jude. Not only is she an employee there in the healthcare services, she's also a former patient there when she was a child. And also the money raised benefited St. Jude, and that money raised then led to a person being chosen who donated a certain amount of money. I mean, it was a completely random raffle. And in fact, he wasn't initially chosen, a friend chose him because the friend won. But in any case, I find that interesting that it really truly was open. Now, unfortunately, it was the United States only, so it wasn't open worldwide, but it really was open to just about anybody who could fit certain criteria, I assume. And then that final member was somebody who was chosen through a video contest, and she's very well representative of so many people who you wouldn't think would be chosen on one of these missions. And so I think it's just fascinating to see how, in the different ways that people went ahead and chose these, one being the people who could afford the tickets, and the other being a wider variety of people who you maybe would have never had the opportunity to do this otherwise.
But I mean, as you touched on this space for everyone, how far are we away from space for everyone? I mean, may it be America only, that's fine for the moment, but also globally. So what is needed to become a tourist beside a reasonable bank account?
We are quite far. We are quite far from space for everyone. We won't get there in my lifetime. My son, he's 3. Maybe we'll get there in his lifetime, but probably not. I'm hoping by his lifetime, though, by that time he is an adult, that he could just, save up enough money. I don't know if I'll get there saving up enough money to get the high prices that Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin have said that they're going to. Well, Blue hasn't said, but they're very, very significantly high. We're definitely talking around the order of $500,000, because Virgin Galactic is about to raise their ticket prices again, and that's the rumor, at least, is if it's in that frame. And so I don't have $500,000. I don't know if you do, but we're far from there. But when you're thinking decades down the line, imagine how far we've come in 30 years, thinking back 30 years ago, or 50 years, thinking back to, when the Apollo missions were going on, or 100 years, and the dawn of the aviation age, So when you're trying to plan ahead and think of the future, it's impossible. It's impossible to really know. And that's why it's different now, and almost crucial now, that we have both commercial companies and international representation. Because if it's just the United States and the Soviet Union, for example, using that analogy of the initial space race to the moon, it's not gonna be sustainable, because geopolitical concerns are never sustainable. Government whims will always cancel things or change priorities. We've seen this time and time again. But if you have a sustainable, profitable business case for being there, and you can talk about that in non-human terms, and you could talk about that in human terms, sending people up there for tourists, for habitation, for working, for so many different aspects of why you'd want to send humans anywhere. Then that could become sustainable. It might just be like Antarctica sustainable. Maybe it might be just like Mount Everest sustainable, where you still have lots of people going to Mount Everest, but it's really dangerous. Or it might be sustainable in that the moon becomes a next continent, as a way that some people have thought of it. And that we have space stations, O'Neillian type space stations, we just don't know. But I don't think it's fair to limit us. So I think that it's beautiful to watch the progress that's happening now, and I'm happy to be part of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, I mean, you talked about that I mean, we go higher and higher, suborbital, orbital, moon, dear moon, Mars. How realistic is that for tourists? And I really mean not commercial astronauts, which can be trained or as scientists or working as commercial astronauts, which can be trained and have a similar education and process like a government astronaut, I assume. So, but are these places for tourists? I mean, you said suborbital, we will see later on orbital. We have seen with a selected number of people, but Moon, Mars, are these really these places? I mean, we have this vision, of course, and science fiction tells us that, hey, spend your vacation on the moon, so 3 days moon, or is a two-week vacation, so that's possible. But do you think it's realistic?
So as an analyst, I only project a few years out because that's the only way we can, nobody really truly knows the future, right? But I want to dream. I want to dream that that's possible. I want to dream that a person like me, even though I am educated, that I could go walk on the moon, because that has been my dream since I was a child, to walk on the moon. And I can dream that people can take vacations in the future and take their children, like my kids. That's a dream. And why not, right? If we want to make that happen, we will make it happen as long as it is profitable and safe. Is it going to be profitable and safe is the big question that remains. And I don't know how to answer that question other than let's just get there. Let's just try. And if we decide that it's not worth it, then we go figure out something else. Maybe it's not space. Maybe it's the deep ocean. Maybe, my daughter is much more of a mermaid than she is an astronaut. So maybe we go explore the deep oceans. But me personally, I think that humanity just wants to expand in any way that we can. And we can talk about ethics of that in the future. But I think it's a beautiful thing to want to spread life elsewhere and find life elsewhere if we happen to find it. And so why stop at Mars? Why not go to the moons of other, the gas giants? Why not see if we can leave our solar system in the future and follow the Voyager probes? I am a science fiction fan, admittedly, but I think it's beautiful to dream.
That's right. Thank you so much for this talk. I would like to pick up a few questions which we got from our audience, and here's one from just a telephone number, or there's no name behind it. So it has been suggested that crewed space flight should be limited to private enterprises, and NASA and governments should restrict themselves to robotic flights. What do you think about that?
I have never heard that be suggested. So that's new to me, because the beauty of robots and humans is that we work together very well here on Earth as well as in space. So you're not going to send a person into the depths of a volcano, as I mentioned earlier, but you will have robots and humans working together near a volcanic site to study, because robots are limited, humans are limited. We work well together, and you see that in space as well. You've got probes out to Pluto and beyond, and you still have humans that want to go to the great beyond, because we can learn so much in both ways. And I don't think it should be limited government versus commercial. I think that, when you're talking about a commercial company, for the most part, they need to make a profit. So they see a return on investment. So either they are contracted by a government or they have some way to make a profit. Governments don't have that limitation. Governments can go out and do things that don't necessarily have any direct financial benefit, but have a scientific benefit and let's say a humanitarian benefit in a sense, because in a way, learning about our universe and about our solar system and about our planet is a benefit to humanity. And I could go into a whole different topic on why that is. I think it's really beneficial for governments and companies to work together, because there are so many different ways that they complement each other.
When you said robotics are supporting humans, it came to my mind. I've seen this tweet this morning that Soyuz and Apollo are patrolling the Starship landing site now. These two robots from, I think, Boston Dynamics or so. These dogs are, so that's pretty nice. So I would like to pick this question from Kevin here. Is there a model for private-public partnerships for private space flight travel? Are companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin, who are offering space flights, suborbital or whatever, proposing services to NASA to providing benefits to humanity. So the question is...
He's touching on the difference between how it used to be, where NASA owned the spacecraft, NASA owned the rocket, NASA, owned everything and paid for everything, and it was a totally government mission, right? To what's happening now with the past decade or so of contracting cargo to the International Space Station, contracting crew to the International Space Station, and now contracting those same services to the moon and in other ways, the robotics to the moon as well as humans to the moon. And it's just a different way to think about it. It's a different way to... I might have to kick him out.
Okay.
But so there are certain ways that certain government contracts that will never be able to make money. So James Webb Space Telescope, for example, never going to be profitable for a company. So that is fits well with how it used to be done and how it still is, that traditional set. But something that can then be used to make money in the future, like transportation services, that can be contracted in this new way so that NASA is an anchor customer, or, we can broaden it, and government agency is an anchor customer because, the Department of Defense gets involved and other governments around the world can do this as well. And that commercial companies can then take what they've developed using that government money and then make money through other means. And I think there's room for both. We've definitely seen the benefit of the latter in most recent times, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that progresses. I'm no expert in public-private partnerships, but it seems to be working pretty well right now.
The almost final question are from Jay. I think it's a quite short answer. Do you expect the near future human low Earth habitats will be owned by governments, companies, or individuals?
So both.
Okay.
Not individuals, probably, but governments and companies, yes. So we've already seen this happening. So we have the International Space Station, which does have a finite life. We do not yet know when the ISS is going to be deorbited, but we can imagine that it's going to be deorbited probably in the next decade. And I do say deorbited. Some people want to save it, but it's probably going to be deorbited. Unfortunately, I love the ISS, but it's a huge expense. Gateway right now is being developed, and that's a combination of multiple countries to get involved there. So that's governments involved. Companies are being contracted to develop it, but it's multiple governments, much like the ISS. And then private companies such as Axiom Space I mentioned, and there are some other players as well that want to build outposts, whether they are crewed or uncrewed. And so there's definitely a mixture there. And the Chinese have just launched their first module for their new space station. Russia has an idea that they want to build a space station. I don't know if they're going to have money for it. So you can see how different companies or different countries will do things differently. Some countries that have very strict regulations in terms of where their spaceflight activities. I'm thinking in particular of Russia, for example. They're going to be government only. Even their companies are very much government. I mean, China as well in a sense too, very government oriented. But here in the United States, you can see that there's a wide variety of companies that could get involved that may or may not have any government involvement at all, but they probably will because it's very, very expensive. You all are probably going to have to cut out like a short little segment here while I kick my son out. Sorry. There's no lock on the door, unfortunately. Anyway, so I hope that answered the question.
I leave it to our audience what we just imagined to happen. So I'm not having this picture in mind now with a mother that just kicks out her little one. Yeah, but we are almost done. So good. Thank you very much for your insights, and these 33 minutes of flying when you have fun. And I mean, it's a great topic, and I think that's not the last time that we will touch on human space, on commercial human space flights in in our future space cafes or on our magazines. So thank you very much for having or for spending the time with us. Or did I cut off something what you was about to say? I don't want to do that.
No, I wasn't going to say it, but now I
Oh,
see in the chat, in the Q&A, that somebody asked about interoperability and like shared systems among these space stations. And I really think that's a great question and something to consider for the future. You know, right now, there's a lot of concerns about geopolitics, especially with the United States and China. So I do not foresee cooperation there. But I think it's really important to consider this in the future because there are certain treaty obligations of rescue and, you know, all different kinds of ways that we can collaborate in space in the future. So I want to imagine in the future that we'd be more of like I'm a Star Trek fan, that we'd be more of like, you know, the United Federation of Planets and be able to work together. We're all going to be still humans with conflicts, but hopefully in the future we will have ways to collaborate and cooperate in space in ways that we can't see right now. And you can hear my son came back in, but it's been an honor to be on the show.
Thank you very much. So let's have a quick look what the next weeks will hold up for us. So next week, so for this week we are done. So we are using the celebration or the Christ Ascent holiday here in Europe to take a quick break. So next Tuesday I will be back in my 33 minutes with Catherine Courtney, and she was the ex general director of the UK Space Agency, and we will talk about how to prevent the next catastrophe. And hey, there he is. So on this week we have also on the 20th of May we have the next Space Café, or the first Space Café United Kingdom, with Ian Jones of Goonhilly Earth Services, which is pretty cool. And on the 25th, direct after Pentecost, I will spend 33 minutes with Will Marshall, the CEO of Planet, talking about the European Green Deal. I mean, Green Deal is all important everywhere, but what can Earth observation provide for supporting the European Green Deal, especially for us here? So on the 27th, our next Space Café Law Breakfast with Stephen Freeland, and he will happen, and we will host the dream team of space law. So Jenny Tapio together with Alexander Suchek. That will be a very inspiring talk or discussion. On the same week, on the same day actually, we will have a next edition of the Space Café Balkan with the CEO of Endurosat. And on the 28th, we will kick off our first Space Café Spain in Spanish. That's it. All events are online on Eventbrite. As always, we would like to hear your feedback, so please check in with us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn. Don't forget to sign up for our daily or bi-weekly newsletter. And if you like to treat yourself with something special, become a Space Watcher today. Your support will help us to keep our job for you. So take your credit card, visit our fan shop at shop.SpaceWatch.Global, and your support is highly appreciated. Thank you very much for your interest today, and thank you, Laura, for this super inspiring talk, and greetings to the young fellow to listen to us and give his mom the time to talk with us. And thanks again to the entire team, again, behind the scene, for doing their great job week by week. Again, I hope you all would stay safe and stay healthy. Thanks for joining us. Hope to see you next week. In the meantime, visit our website and follow us on social media. And don't forget, become a Space Watcher. Thank you very much. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.